Milano, Italy. The Stadio Giuseppe Meazza, one of the most famous soccer stadiums in the world. Something there was very wrong. There was no noise. There was always noise. Crowds of chanting fans, the shouts of vendors, of police struggling to maintain order. At this time of day, the Stadio was never quiet, especially on game day, and the hometown favorites were supposed to be playing their arch rivals to a sold-out crowd. Yet all 80,018 seats were empty. No one watching, no one playing. No one there at all. Only a terrifying stillness beneath the open sky. In that sky was a blimp, hovering overhead, as if filming the game that was not being played. On the side of the blimp, in small, unobtrusive lettering, was the written Speedwagon. In the gondola, the blimp staff looked down at the empty stadium nervously. They looked at each other and nodded. One of them spoke into a transmitter.
The stadio's deserted. You're clear to proceed.
Roger that.
The man on the other end of the line stepped forward into the empty seats and waved at the blimp overhead. A light flashed. They'd seen him.
Keep a close watch. Like I said, anything happens to me, scram.
Understood. Be careful, Guido, Mista.
Switching off the receiver, the man, Mista, reached down and pulled a gun out of his boot. With practiced ease, he took aim at the tunnel the players entered from.
Okay, come on out, Sheila E.
His voice was low, but it carried, projected like an opera singer's. For 10 full seconds there was silence. Then two figures emerged from the shadows, their movements a far cry from the intensity the home team athletes typically displayed. One was a girl, Sheila E. Her features were young, suggested she had not yet fully matured, but her eyes were something else entirely. They were like the eyes of a wild thing, prepared to lunge forward and sink her teeth into the throat of all she surveyed, prepared to tear it asunder. There were a number of scars on her face. She showed no signs of self-consciousness about them. She was escorting a boy, who stepped gingerly onto the pitch, head down, his strawberry earrings aflutter. When the two of them had reached a point 20 meters in front of Mista, he yelled out,
Stop!
They did. Sheila E. stopped on a dime, like a soldier doing drills. But the boy flinched and stood there twitching. Mista's gun was aimed at him, the barrel trained directly on his face, between his brow and his lips, toward the upper end of the bridge of his nose. It did not waver.
Long time no see.
The boy's head jerked up, looking at him for the first time. Mista's eyes were cold like ice.
Tell me, Fugo. What have you been up to?
The boy didn't answer. He seemed at a loss for words.
As far as we can tell, you spent the last 6 months playing piano in a bar. You play piano? I had no idea! All that time we knew each other. Yes, rich kids get to learn all sorts of fancy tricks.
Fugo muttered under his breath.
What did you say? You got something to say, spit it out!
Fugo twisted his lips to one side.
It was nothing.
It wasn't nothing. He'd rejected Mista's implication out of hand. Mista cocked an eyebrow, but let it drop.
Okay, then tell me. You got anything to say to me? Anything you want to know? I'll answer what I can.
Fugo stood in silence for a long moment. Then he made up his mind.
Is he really dead?
There was raw grief in his eyes. When he saw that, Mista frowned and glanced at Sheila E.
Sheila E., cover your ears.
She nodded curtly and jammed her fingers in her ears with such force that it was a wonder they didn't bleed, sealing off all outside sound. Her obedience was downright pathological. Mista did not seem concerned. He looked back at Fugo.
You heard about Bucciarati's death, then?
The color drained from Fugo's face. His whole body began to shake, and his teeth began to chatter. It was like he'd suddenly been flung out into a blizzard.
Narancia Nabacchio died too. You remember what you said?
You aren't looking at reality! You can't survive on ideals alone! We can't live outside the mob.
Fugo remembered those words. He would never forget them. Those words had led directly to him leaving the man he'd bet his life on. Had he made a mistake? Had he been the one ignorant of what was really going on? He had wrestled with that question every day since, and now the answer, or part of it, stood before him. One of the 5 people he'd abandoned on that day.
Mista, is it true?
His voice shook. His question was not particularly specific, but Mista smiled faintly.
You've heard the rumors then. What did you hear?
That...
Fugo looked at Sheila E. Mista had made her cover her ears so she wouldn't hear what they were about to say. It took a lot of nerve for him to speak further.
What I heard was that the boss had finally shown himself. And his name...
His name?
Was Giorno Giovanna. They said that Passione's boss was only 16, and his youth was the reason why he kept his identity a secret. But traitors emerged and tried to uncover his identity, which got an innocent girl mixed up in mob affairs, and nearly led to an all-out war. So he saw no further reason to hide, and revealed himself at last.
Yeah, you know that's a lie. You were with us right before it all went down.
Mista's gun remained pointed right at Fugo's head.
You were with us before Diavolo, the real boss, killed Bucciarati and the others.
Fugo's throat felt dry, but he didn't dare swallow.
Giorno joined the gang specifically to defeat the boss and take over. Bucciarati was helping him all along. Makes sense, doesn't it? You don't look surprised. The moment he joined our team, Giorno was an ordinary recruit. He never seemed like a rookie, and Bucciarati always treated him like a trusted partner, not a subordinate. Giorno insists they were even partners, but truth is, Bucciarati was working for Giorno. That's how it felt to me, anyway. And he was ready to give his life for Giorno's dream. And he did. Took Diavolo with him. Giorno moved quickly and efficiently, solidifying his power. It was beautiful to behold. This is the part you heard, right? We weren't exactly hiding.
Yeah. The secret gangster prince cleaning house in the underworld. It's an urban legend. And they say you're his number 2, Mista.
Whoa, that bit's all wrong. People just assume the gunman's the right-hand man, but the real number 2 is Polnareff. I'm number 3. Think about it. You take the number 2 twice, you get 4. 4 is bad luck. I'm not getting anywhere near that. 3 is much safer.
Polnareff. That's a French name, isn't it?
You never met him. And his name won't do you any good. You won't find out anything about him.
All of this was clearly very secret information. Once again, Fugo found himself wondering why he was here. It had all been too much for him. Killing the boss and taking over? That was insane. So he'd left Bucciarati's team. Then last night, Sheila E. had found him. Sent by the reformed Passione. He'd known this day might come, but had not expected this.
They have more power than the old boss ever dreamed of.
6 months ago, Passione had been powerful as far as organized crime syndicates went. They had connections in business, on the force, in government. Bribes and coercion got them almost anything they wanted, but not this. Summoning him to a UEFA 5-star stadium like the Giuseppe Meazza meant turning away tens of thousands of rabid fans and postponing a match despite broadcast contracts with television stations around the world. That took power beyond any president, beyond anything the old Passione ever dreamed of. And the blimp above them belonged to the Speedwagon Foundation, one of the most famous research facilities in the world, not prone to granting favors to crime lords. Fugo had no idea how someone would contact them. But if they were here to research something, it must be...
Me? Who else could it be?
Fugo could feel Mista's eyes boring into him. Sheila E. was watching him too.
Fugo! What do you think? Do you consider yourself a traitor? Did you heartlessly abandon Bucciarati in his hour of need? Does the guilt keep you up at night? I gotta admit, you may have been right. I mean, Bucciarati kicked the bucket. You didn't come with, so you survived. I only survived because I'm a super lucky mega nice guy born under a blessed star, but you didn't have that to fall back on. You'd never have made it. You had no shot of surviving the insane fight Diavolo and Giorno had. You were smart enough to see that. Always were. So, on that point, we're cool. The problem is now, what do you intend?
When Fugo said nothing, Mista made a show of pulling his fingers out of his ears. Sheila E. followed suit with an audible pop and stood at attention, ready to fight at any second.
Fugo, show your stand.
Sheila E.'s eyes were even more like daggers. Fugo's face found a new shade of pale.
Show us Purple Haze.
Fugo grit his teeth, but did as he was told. Fugo's body appeared to blur, then double, like a heat haze. Then the double stepped forward. It was like his soul had stepped free of his flesh, moving of its own accord. A part of his personality given form. This was his stand. A patchwork thing, more zombie than man, eyes peeled wide and bloodshot. He called it Purple Haze. Another aspect of Fugo, a power all his own, one of the most fearsome in all the world. Purple Haze ground his teeth irritably, drool running down his chin. Fugo hated looking at him. It was creepy, too creepy. But Mista did not flinch at the sight.
So, Fugo, you know why we called you to a place like this in broad daylight, don't you? Fugo, your stand is crazy dangerous. The killer virus your Purple Haze spreads rots anything it infects. They melt to death. There's no way to guard against it, no way to control what it infects. Indiscriminate, vicious, murder incarnate. But I know that virus isn't fond of light. I know the range it spreads is only 5 meters. You know I know.
I do.
So, here, this place, this distance, this weather, your Purple Haze has no chance of fighting my pistols.
The gun Mista was holding was just an ordinary gun, loaded with ordinary bullets. But Fugo could see tiny little things floating in the air between them, like nasty little fairies. This was Mista's stand. The bullets he fired would follow unexpected paths, slip past all defenses, and strike where the most damage could be done. Fugo could spread his virus all he wanted, but Mista was 20 meters away. It would never reach him. In an open field with the sun beating down, the virus would wither in no time at all and be harmless. No one else would get involved. Fugo alone was certain to die.
And the girl.
Fugo could feel Sheila's eyes drilling into his back. She was a sacrificial pawn. If he did anything unexpected, it was her job to throw herself at him. She knew the virus would infect her, kill her, but she would not hesitate to throw her life away. He'd known she would do that the moment he first laid eyes on her. She seemed like the type. There was no way out.
I know, Mista.
He could hear his voice shaking, but forced himself to speak.
I know that if you meant to kill me, you would have done it by now.
Oh?
Mista raised an eyebrow.
This isn't like you, Fugo. Once was when your back was against the wall, you'd snap and do something crazy. I gotta admit, when you decided not to follow Bucciarati, I was relieved. You'd snap at the wrong time, spray that virus around everywhere, we all die. That'd be just dumb, yeah?
He was insulting Fugo. That was clear, but even clearer.
He's doing this deliberately, trying to wind me up. He wants me to fight him. Give him an excuse to shoot me. He's sure he can kill me before I hurt Sheila E.
Fugo was sure now. Sure about why he'd been brought here. He took a deep breath and said,
Not everywhere.
Huh?
I can't spread the virus everywhere. Only 6 times. There are only 6 virus capsules in Purple Haze's hands. I can only attack 6 times in a single day. You know this.
Mista narrowed his eyes. Fugo sounded calm. He'd worked it out.
Then I'll ask you again, Fugo. What are you thinking? Right now.
I've never betrayed Passione. Have I, Mista?
I see. Those words were chosen carefully. You always were clever. You know what you have to do, don't you? How you can prove your loyalty to Giorno?
Prove?
To prove you're not our enemy, go kill someone who is. If you can't, then we'll kill you.
There was nothing false in his tone. It was not an empty threat, not false bravado, simply the truth. An order. One delivered with authority. 6 months ago, when they were both low-ranking hoods, he could never have sounded this intimidating. He'd grown. The gulf between them was immense. Fugo's teeth wanted to chatter, but he forced them to lie still. He felt like a frog, frozen in a snake's glare, but at least he had earned a stay of execution. Again. This should have been a relief, but instead, Fugo found himself extremely out of sorts. Bitterness bubbled up inside him, and it was all he could do to keep it inside. It was a thorny bile that burned as if on fire, yet remained terribly cold. Suddenly, Purple Haze began to roar. The sound yanked Fugo's attention outward.
Enough! Put him away.
Fugo allowed his double to slip back inside him. Behind him, Sheila E. snorted.
You can't even keep your own thing quiet? Do you have no self-control at all?
Fugo could not argue that.
Don't start fighting yet. You're gonna be working together.
We are?
Not just the two of you. You'll have help. These aren't the kind of guys you take on alone.
Guys?
Your target is one man, but he's got a team protecting him. If you don't have a team, you won't win. Tactics 101.
Mista caught Fugo's eye and held it. His gaze told Fugo all he needed to know. This target meant business. A chill went down his spine.
If he has a team... then...
Mista nodded.
The leftovers from the old Passion. The narcotics team.
At roughly the same point in time, in a warehouse at the edge of Villa San Giovanni, a small town on the Strait of Messina, affairs were already set in motion. A man's sobs echoed through the dimly lit room. A boy stood in front of him. Sunken cheeks, shockingly large eyes. Cuts ran this way and that all over him, even his eyelids and lips. These were not old wounds. Most still had scabs on them, in all sorts of unpleasant colors. Even now, the boy was carving a new gash with a dagger, cutting his own cheek open. The boy helpfully provided oral renditions of the sound effects he imagined would accompany his cutting. He looked barely alive, his eyes unfocused. Once he had more or less finished slicing his own flesh, he began mumbling incoherently.
Modern man is incomplete. All kinds of shit is just not enough. I don't mean like nutrition or exercise or... I mean, in comparison to primitive man, there's something in their lives, their daily lives, that just isn't there.
There was a sudden crackle in his throat, and something came flying out. He coughed up a scab from a wound on the inside of his throat.
Like, they say don't ever feel alive. Not really. I'm serious, no legs being pulled. Serious business.
Blood was now oozing down the side of his mouth, but the boy did not appear to notice.
So what of it? Well, this is the really extra serious bit. When a life form doesn't have enough life power, they go extinct. Without fail. Like the pandas! They're doomed! They only eat bamboo! Nothing else! There's no hope for them! Mankind's not much better off. We're trying so hard to be civilized, to hide the fact that we've got nothing else to live for. I don't know who said any of this shit, but someone did, and I gotta avoid that. I gotta feel alive. So...
He started cutting himself again.
The pain makes everything feel real. Calls forth the life within me. Without that, I'll go extinct, and I don't want to be extinct. So what? You. Was it Harry? Hallie? No. Sally? Something like that, right?
There was a lightness to his tone, like he was addressing an old friend. The man, whose name was actually Saleh, was covered in sweat, his forehead creased with lines of worry. This was a moment of crisis for him. He, too, was a former member of Passione. In times past, he had clashed with Mista and Giorno in pursuit of treasure left by one of the gang's leaders, Polpo. Much like Fugo, he had been ordered to make amends.
But the name, Sally, that's a very salty name. Get it? Because it means salt. Sally Salty. God damn, that's funny. Hey, I'm talking to you here. And when Vittorio Cataldi speaks to you, you best not ignore him. Or wait, do you not have manners? Hello? Which one of us is in the right here? Me being all polite, speaking clearly, making sense? Or you, sitting there in rude, stony silence, not saying a blessed thing? No matter how you look at it, the answer's me, ain't it? You got no arguments with that, do you? I'm not surprised. Or do you? If you got a problem with me, show it. Show me your stand. Let me see what craft work can do.
Saleh was a good deal older than Vittorio, but the boy clearly had the upper hand. Everything about the younger boy made Saleh's hair stand on end. He'd been through his share of close calls, even fought Mista and lived to tell the tale. But he'd never been this scared. The boy's bug-crazy eyes were staring at him. Windows to a soul found wanting. For all his talk of mankind and civilization, this boy's eyes proved he had no future. There was no glimmer, no sign of what he might become. No dream, no hope, no passion. Only the hostility that came tumbling out of his mouth.
Is he really a part of that narcotics team? The team that turned an 11-figure profit?
Saleh found it hard to believe. In the old Passione, they had been the team that everyone dreamed of joining. The team that got everything they wanted. That sucked at the teat of God. They were kings of the world, with all the money and women they could ask for. Able to do anything they wanted. Or so everyone thought. Yet this kid was simple-minded, oblivious, uneducated, concerned with nothing but what irritated him the most at any given moment. And Saleh's gaze drifted away from Vittorio. There was a third figure in the room, sitting in the corner, barely moving enough to breathe. Her skin was shockingly pale, her lips almost as pale, with only the faintest hint of red. Her figure obscured in shadows. Empty eyes stared vacantly at nothing. She was humming a song so faintly it could scarcely be heard. It was a famous Sicilian song, Vitti na Crozza. In English, I saw a skull. What should have been a fast, buoyant song was unrecognizable. So sluggish and slurred the delivery. She was young, still a girl. Her hair spilled out across the floor. It was very, very long, like she had forgotten to cut it, or forgotten this was even an option. Sitting limp on the ground, her frame was withered and frail, her pale neck trembling under the weight of her head, looking like it might snap at any second. Her name was Angelica Attanazio. Her stand was called Nightbird Flying. It appeared to be nothing but a little bird flying around. No threat at all. But it had led Sale and his partner Zucchero here to this place of death. Sale glared at Angelica with all his might, but she ignored it. This was not a display of false bravado. She simply wasn't even aware of his presence. A trickle of drool ran down her chin. There was blood in it. She was bleeding from the mouth. She was obviously a junkie. But this thoughtless kid with no thoughts for the future, and this junkie girl with not much longer to live, these pathetic failures had driven Sale into a corner, a fact that enraged him. He bit his lip so hard it was bleeding, but he couldn't feel the pain. And not because he was too angry to feel it. He'd been tainted by Nightbird Flying and no longer felt pain. The world beneath his feet felt shaky. It was all he could do to remain on his own 2 feet. He felt dizzy, but the dizziness would not fade. His sense of balance would not return. Advanced movement was out of the question. None of his usual tricks were even remotely possible. A direct assault was the only option. Sale glared at Vittorio. The boy was cutting himself again. The flat of his blade was like a mirror, and Sale could see himself reflected in it.
That dagger.
Sale had been keeping an eye on the dagger. In the same way that Mista was a gunslinger, Vittorio was a knife specialist. But in a battle between stands, an ordinary blade would be nearly useless. So what secret function did it serve? Sale's craftwork had the ability to make objects stick where they were. He could be shot with bullets, stabbed with blades, and the moment they touched his skin, he could fix them in place, and they would not harm him. So a dagger would normally be of no concern. Normally.
Right. I have nothing to fear.
By this point, he had lost the ability to make rational decisions. He had survived to this point by respecting the limitation of his own stand and fleeing whenever he believed himself to be in danger. But he failed to do that here.
La 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 la.
Much like Angelica, he could no longer think things through. Vittorio stopped cutting and gave him a frosty look.
Come on! Your stand and my dolly dagger! Which one has the right to exist? Let's find out!
The moment the dagger's tip left the boy's flesh, Sale lunged forward. If Vittorio was going to try and stab him, Sale was going to let him. He would fix it in place, then do the same to the boy's body. But even as he closed the distance, the blade's tip never pointed at him. Not only did Vittorio make no move to attack with the blade, he made no move at all. He just stood there waiting, not even trying to defend. It was strange, unnatural, but Sale was too close to stop himself now. He had to follow through, and he did, slamming his fist into Vittorio's unguarded chest. He fixed the boy's heart in place, killing him instantly. There was no way for him to avoid it. He had won, or so he thought. The boy's foot raised up and kicked him. Sale went flying, rolling across the ground.
Impossible!
He'd struck the boy's chest. He looked up and Vittorio was doubled over, clutching his chest in obvious pain. Sweat was pouring down Vittorio's face. But he should have been dead.
How?
Sale wondered, then noticed something downright bizarre. There was something floating in the air between them. It was a reddish pink, and looked sticky, like meat, like an organ, small, compact, round. Sale recognized it.
A heart?
A heart, torn out of someone's chest, fixed in space.
But whose?
Sale's head suddenly looked downwards. He had suddenly lost the strength to support it, and the weight of his head had pulled it down, giving him a look at the gaping hole in his chest. Sale's attack had reflected back on him, but he no longer had the time to wonder why. With no heart to pump it, his body was starved for blood. His consciousness faded, never to awaken again. With a splat, Sale's heart fell to the ground, free of the power that held it suspended.
Massimo! Massimo! Help!
The warehouse door was flung open. Light poured in and a tall man stepped inside. He was dragging something. It looked like a plastic sheet of some kind, but he dropped it when he saw Vittorio.
You do something crazy again?
Hurry! My heart! It's not beating right! Stopping! 30% stopped!
I keep warning you, Vittorio. Your dolly dagger can only reflect 70% of damage. You can't let just anybody hit you and expect to get away with it.
As he spoke, the tall man strode over to the boy and thumped him hard on the chest, knocking Vittorio down. Angelica cackled hysterically.
Christ, take it easy!
Vittorio got back up. He was no longer in pain. When the man touched him, all bodily functions had returned to normal. The man ignored him and walked over to Angelica.
That's all?
She nodded.
There's nobody else around. Nobody at all. Nobody looking at us.
Then she pointed at the plastic thing he'd tossed aside.
Except that.
Oh, is that him? Zucchero. I heard he can deflate things.
He came walking over to get a closer look. Examined closely, it was shaped like a man-shaped balloon with the air let out of it, and it was twitching.
Most of the time you can't use your power on yourself, but this guy clearly can.
Yes, and when he's flat like that, he can slip through narrow gaps and get close to his targets. That's how he and Sale made their approach.
Bad luck! We've got Angelica. Nobody gets the drop on us.
Vittorio stomped over that man, grinding his foot against him.
Ew, gross! He's pulsing.
Even deflated, his heart's still beating. Even now, my manic depression's made it impossible for him to control himself.
The tall man looked down at his defeated opponent without emotion. Massimo Volpe. This was the man's name. The man so dangerous, he was at the top of Giorno Giovanna's hit list. His existence was seen as such a problem that as long as he could be eliminated, the others would be allowed to flee. But to look at him, he seemed the quiet type, not someone who made a strong impression. He was Italian, but of an angular, bony build that made him look more Irish. His nose was thin, as were his eyes and eyebrows. Vittorio continued toying with Zucchero's remains.
So he can't inflate himself, but now we can't torture him either. Or can he talk like this?
Who knows? There's no saving him now.
Man, your manic depression is nasty. Textbook overkill.
One final member of their team entered the room, an old man.
God damn it, Massimo. I told you not to fight unless you have to. Vittorio and I can handle mooks like this. You and Angelica should let us protect you.
The old man's face was covered in deep wrinkles, but his back was straight and his movements lively.
Oh, kokakui.
Angelica happily wafted over to him. She rubbed her face on his thigh like a cat greeting her owner. He patted her head tenderly, but never took his eyes off Massimo.
You hear me, Massimo? You're the heart of this team. We only exist for you.
But you're the leader, Vladimir. I just do what you say.
Massimo's heart did not appear to be in it. He and the old man, Vladimir Kokaki, had this conversation before.
I know you don't see it. But you could rule the world, you know. With a stand like yours, you could place yourself above all other men.
So could you. No one can beat your rainy day dream away.
Oh, and me? My dolly dagger's pretty good too, right?
We're all great.
A sharp mind in an old body. A man who did not care. A thoughtless boy and a junkie girl. This was the narcotics team all Passione was frantically searching for.